a name that for the next 21 years swept across the entire continent like a storm of death, blood, and silence. 1206 to 1227, this wasn't just his era, this was the deadliest prime in human history. One man, before whose sword great kings bowed, empires shattered, and cities were reduced to dust. It is said that during his rule alone he took the lives of nearly more than 20 million people. So much devastation that the population of Asia dropped by 11%. Whether fate stood with him or not, destruction always marched shoulder to shoulder with him. And today, we are stepping into that same dark age, where every victory was soaked in suffering, and every defeat echoed with silent screams. This is the prime era of Genghis Khan, 1206 to 1227. The deadliest chapter of human history. This is the story of a nomadic herdsman's son who began by avenging his father's death, and when the Mongol chiefs bestowed upon Temujin the title Genghis Khan, meaning oceanic ruler, in 1206-1227, no one had the slightest idea that the next 21 years would become the largest blood-written chapter on the map of the world. And today the biggest question is it true that between 1206 and 1227, almost 20 million people died because of this one man? Look, this figure isn't a direct count of battlefield casualties. It's a demographic estimate based on the massive population decline in 13th century China and Central Asia, nearly 30 to 40 million. So the number 20 million is not 100% verified historical data, but what is 100% true is that Genghis Khan's campaigns affected millions, and some historians even believe that nearly 3/4, 75% of the population of modern-day Iran disappeared, making it one of the greatest devastations in history. Now the question is, how did this happen? Genghis Khan's empire didn't run only on the strength of his sword. Its foundation rested on a strict law called yasa, which kept the punishment for theft and treason as direct execution, and instilled such discipline in the army that if even 1 of 10 soldiers ran away, all 10 were punished with death. Because of this fear and discipline, the Mongols invented their most lethal tactic, the feigned retreat. The Mongols would deliberately pretend to flee. The enemy would chase them out of excitement, weaken on open ground, and then the Mongols would turn back, surround them, and finish them. Helping them in this was their incredible speed, because each soldier kept at least 3 or 4 horses, allowing their units to travel for weeks without fatigue, moving at lightning pace. And the YAM, courier system, delivered messages across the empire in days, so enemies never knew when or from where the next attack would come. In these 21 years, the first knock was at the Great Wall of China, where in 1215, the Jin dynasty capital Zhongdu was surrounded and looted. But the real chapter of terror began in 1219 in Central Asia, when the Shah of Khwarazm provoked Genghis by harming Mongol envoys. And in response, Genghis deployed Chinese siege engineers, who turned the nomadic Mongols into masters of siege warfare. Then in 1220, Bukhara was attacked after crossing the 300-mile Kizilkum desert so suddenly that the enemy was stunned. And in cities like Samarkand, surviving civilians were forcibly recruited as human shields in future battles. This wasn't just war, this was deliberate terror, so that no one in the future would ever dare raise their head again. The scale of this destruction was so massive that research says farmlands turned back into forests after Mongol invasions, absorbing nearly 700 million tons of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. There came a time when the entire world trembled at one name, Genghis Khan. A nomadic boy who suffered his father's death, hunger, poverty, and betrayal in childhood. That same boy in his prime had become such a storm that even his shadow could bring empires down. When he rode out of the Mongolian steppes, he had just a few hundred riders, but his mind, his strategy, and his fearless heart, these made him different from the rest of the world. In his prime, Genghis Khan meant the enemy's knees gave way even before the battle began. His armies arrived like the wind, turned cities to dust like sandstorms, and vanished like lightning. He shattered the world's strongest empires as if they were sandcastles. The Great Wall of China was ineffective before him. The Khwarazmian Empire crumbled under his forces, and huge Silk Road cities would open their gates just upon hearing his name. His great weapon in his prime wasn't just the sword, it was his mind, his spy networks, his fast cavalry, his discipline. He read the enemy's language, pulse, and weaknesses as if reading a book. His strategy was simple: never let the enemy understand where the attack will come from. Sometimes from the front, sometimes from behind, sometimes at night, sometimes pretending defeat, and then surrounding the enemy and crushing them. In his prime, the Mongol Empire expanded day by day, growing so vast that it is still considered the largest contiguous empire in history. Genghis Khan weaponized fear. Those who resisted were destroyed, and those who bowed were spared. This was his deadliest trick. He knew fear was the fastest way to win a war. Under his rule, trade grew, roads became safe, the postal system thrived, and Yasa, his law, strengthened Mongol society. But the true brilliance of his prime was his leadership. He ate with his soldiers, lived like them, rode like them. He always stayed at the front in battle, taking the first risk himself. That's why his soldiers were ready to die for him. Genghis Khan in his prime meant a man who bent the world using power, fear, strategy, and speed. Wherever his banner flew, that land was changed forever. After 1219, Genghis Khan became even more dangerous. The more his empire expanded, the broader his vision became. He no longer thought only about winning. He wanted to reshape the world on his own terms. His army had now become a moving machine among millions. Every soldier knew when to switch horses, from which direction to surround, when to unleash arrows, and when to let the enemy flee only to trap them from behind. In his prime, Genghis Khan began thinking beyond his borders. His eyes were now fixed on the west. The fall of Khwarazm was only the beginning. He had heard that farther west lay even larger cities, richer markets, and civilizations that believed themselves the masters of the world. Genghis thought, if the world considers itself my enemy, then I will turn the world into my battlefield. He sent his generals, Subutai, Jebe, and Jochi, to test the strength of the Western powers, and what they saw ignited a new fire inside Genghis. In his prime, fear was no longer just spreading among his enemies. Fear had begun crossing continents. European kings, Russian princes, and Central Asian rulers had lost sleep. They did not know what this threat was, a force that appeared from nowhere, swept everything aside, and disappeared like the wind. Every one of his campaigns became bigger, faster, and more destructive than the last. But this wasn't just violence. Genghis Khan in his prime was now building a system: law, trade, security, and an empire where if you paid taxes, no one could touch even your finger. He sent his sons to different regions so they would learn how the world worked and how to rule it one day. Now he did not hunger only for victories. He wanted the world to tremble at his name even after his death. But there was one thing that only he understood. The greater the power, the greater the betrayal. The larger the empire, the weaker the trust. That is why in his prime he never trusted anyone blindly. His gaze always looked far. Who is loyal? Who is wavering? His life was spent on horseback, his nights over maps and plans, and his days began with news of new territories falling. This era of Genghis Khan's prime was the time when the world realized this man was not just a conqueror. He was an epic, a force whose end would come only with his death. But until then, the world had no choice but to remain under his footsteps.